Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to the final episode of Climbing Consulting for 2021. It has been a great year for the show, had some fantastic guests on this year. Really excited to see what 2022 has in store. But before we get there, I wanted to end this year with a brilliant guest and someone who I know you're going to love listening to. In this conversation, I speak with Rob Chapman, the founder and CEO of Founders Intelligence, the entrepreneur-powered consultancy that helps clients to identify and seize the next billion-pound opportunity that is emerging in their industry. Having begun his career in the startup world, Rob moved into consulting with PwC, wanting to build those core skills that many young professionals want to learn. But it was his early days in startups that had ignited a passion in Rob, and a chance meeting with one of his now business partners led to the idea of a consultancy that helped large corporates grow through entrepreneurial growth. And it was this idea that led to Founders Intelligence and Rob launching the business with his co-founders, Brent Hoberman and Henry Lane Fox, at just 26. In this conversation, Rob and I explore a whole range of fascinating topics critical to the Founders Intelligence journey and to Rob's own journey as a leader, including why mentorship is so critical for career success and how mentors have played a vital role in Rob's journey. The powerful career advice that helped Rob and his leadership team take Founders Intelligence from a startup to a global team approaching 50 people, and how you can use that same advice to accelerate your own career. And we talk about the exciting news of their recent acquisition by Accenture and find out how, by partnering with Accenture, Founders Intelligence will be able to accelerate its mission and help even more corporates grow through entrepreneurial growth. Whether you are looking to grow your career through mentorship and you're looking to find mentors and want advice on how to do it, or maybe you're looking to build your consultancy itself and are interested to find out how entrepreneurial growth can help you do that, I know that you are going to get a ton from this conversation. So with the intro over, all that's left to say is thank you for listening all this year. I hope you have a lovely Christmas, and please enjoy today's conversation with Rob Chapman. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Well, I think this has been a long time in the making, and I know the exciting news for yourself and Founders Intelligence that happened this week is something we've had to, I guess, be mindful of in when we've scheduled it. But I'm really pleased that we've got this in before I go off on paternity in the same week as your great news. And so why don't we start there, and maybe for my listeners' benefit, could you give a bit of background on who you are, how you've got to where you are today, and exactly what that news was?
Great. So maybe starting with the great news is the company that I have been building over the last 8.5 years, Founders Intelligence, was acquired this week by Accenture. And that's really incredible for us from the pace of growth that we're going to be able to deliver for the company and the impact we're going to be able to deliver for our clients. And so it's been obviously a huge decision for us as a independent and very entrepreneurial company to then decide that we want to grow our company as part of something bigger. So I'm sure we'll end up talking about that decision and how we made it and why Accenture as well. And we've been very thoughtful about that. But maybe just some background for your listeners on me. So I'm Rob Chapman. I run Founders Intelligence. We're a consultancy focused on helping clients deliver entrepreneurial growth, which means to us growing by doing anything new. So we compare it to replicative growth, where you repeat what you're doing already. You open more shops, more countries, more business units, this sort of thing. We are looking at how you explore the world of what you're not doing. And the way we do that is by thinking about how an entrepreneur might approach the same problem and how entrepreneurs are approaching the problem. So we look at the startups that have been started in an industry of a client. We analyze what they're doing, why they're doing it, what that means for the future of the industry. And we speak to those founders and we think about what they might do together with you as a client, if that's the right approach. And then we help our clients to deliver that. So whatever we conclude from that strategic process, we help them think about how to get it into market. As any entrepreneurs, we're very impact driven and about getting things into market. So that's what we do. It's a company that I helped set up 8.5 years ago, and we are 47 people across 3 markets. We're in the UK, Germany, and Brazil. And yeah, we've been celebrating because we're really excited about the journey ahead now.
Fantastic, Rob. Well, I think a great intro, and also for our listeners, full disclosure, we also work together. So Founders Intelligence are a client of Create Engages. But I'd love to dive in, because obviously we've got to know each other really well, got to know your team. I think a lot of what you said there around the sort of innovation and your focus, I mean, I'm still in awe of many of the jobs your team had before joining, and if for no other reason than I don't understand what half of them did. And I always remember the first workshop we did together where I had to get out Google for quite a few of the terms. But it's brilliant what you do, and obviously seeing that impact with clients. And I think maybe to your point, why don't we start with the Accenture news, and you mentioned around people listening might be interested to understand the journey you went on. And obviously your business is very successful. You're in a really hot space in innovation. You do great work. I suspect at the point where you thought, actually, we want to partner with someone to accelerate that growth, you would have had a few options or some suitors. Can you explain a bit about actually the journey you went on and how ultimately you decided that Accenture was the right partner and parent for that?
Yeah. So you're right, we're on real roll. November this month actually is our record ever revenue month. We've come very strongly out of COVID. As you can imagine, everyone stopped thinking about growth and being entrepreneurial for the sort of 3 months straight after COVID, and then suddenly thought, wow, we really have to think much more creatively about our future. Now we've seen how tech businesses have been able to grow through the pandemic and how much of our business is dependent on tech and how much our clients are expecting from us. And so, the phone went kind of crazy in September last year, and we've been sort of sold out since the autumn. And really the proper conversation around whether we're best staying independent for the next phase of growth started early this year around, if we want to, being as ambitious as we are, we want to be growing our business at multiples of the current growth rather than sort of incrementally each year. And, there are lots of ways to do that. You either invest much more heavily in what you do already and building your own growth and marketing and sales capabilities, or we thought about the option of acquiring and becoming the acquirer ourselves and looking at, and we had some conversations with other companies that seemed synergistic. But actually it became really clear to us that so much of what makes us unique is not reinventing the sort of rails of consulting, right? The stuff we really enjoy and that we're really brilliant at and that we want to scale, we can do as part of something bigger, and actually it lets us focus on those things that make us unique rather than on reinventing stuff that people have done many times over. And that's a realization I had about halfway through the company, that we were trying to reinvent too much. And every year we think again about, why are we building that from scratch when someone's probably invented it already? Like, why are we trying to work out how to do marketing when there are good people who know how to do that very well, hence why we're working with you. And when we came to that conclusion that actually we should explore properly whether one of these larger organizations might be a better place for us, we then, being good consultants, came up with some clear criteria for what we're really looking for. And those were really that, A, they need to love us for us. Weren't looking for anyone who wanted to roll us into something pre-existing or thought we could help them be the front end. We always got that pitch. Or, you could be the front end for what we're trying to sell with your strategy work. Then we could, no way. That turns us into a sales house for something that we don't know about. So that was the first thing, of they have to really love us for what we do and be excited about what we do. Secondly, that has to be strategic to their plan. So i.e., there's already investment focus on our area, on entrepreneurial growth, or at least growth through innovation. And then thirdly, it needs to protect and more than protect, actually increase our talent proposition. As with any consultancy, our talent proposition is everything. It's the lifeblood of the company. And we need to have a partner for growth who really believes in that, thinks about it creatively and hard. And we had a really, really rigorous process. Again, being consultants, we drank our own medicine and we spoke to more or less everybody. We had 16 deep conversations, and we ended up, Accenture head and shoulders over any other option. And really, they've been absolutely fantastic through the whole process in surprising us almost at every turn about how thoughtful they were about each of those three things, about how much they really tried to understand our business and what made it unique and what it needs to scale, and especially around the talent proposition, because, as one of the world's most acquisitive companies, they really understand what you can, can't, should and shouldn't do with a people business as you go through this really important and exciting transition. And then thirdly, obviously the strategic point, it's amazing how much, they had come to similar conclusions about the growth they wanted to see. And so, really they, like I said, surprised and delighted us at each stage. And it's been a real pleasure working with them so far. And 36 hours into our new relationship, it's been a fantastic 36 hours. They really have stuck to their principles on how they want to welcome us into their group. And we're excited for what's ahead.
Fantastic, Robert. I think really, firstly, great to hear the 36 hours so far, so good. And I think that process, and like you say, being good consultants, actually were very structured about this. And a lot of my listeners either are building consulting firms, maybe or maybe not to sell, or to your point, looking to be the other side as the acquirer. You mentioned Accenture were head and shoulders above the rest. And I'm interested, what was it that they did differently in those maybe initial meetings that made you go, wow, we're really interested in Accenture? And if it wasn't purely the initial meeting, was it there were sort of rounds of, almost, is it Dutch voting where you drop the loser and you go to the next five? It's what you always used to do at university. But how did that process work? Was it just clear from the off, or was this sort of something that you went through those iterations? And if it was, what really was it that made you go, wow, this is the partner?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing, and for anyone who goes through this process, thinking about what it is that really makes our business unique. You have to know yourself, right, before you can know what good looks like in a partner that's going to be a good home for the business. And so we thought a lot about, what is it that our clients love about us? What is it that our people love about us? We then went and asked all our people, what is it that you love about working here? So we know really, when you get down to it, we did some workshops to say, well, what do we really need to deliver for you to make this the best place to work and deliver on all your dreams? And then it was using that sort of self-knowledge to look at what it is that each of the potential partners, acquirers were talking about at each stage, that helped us say, well, actually, these are the best conversations, and these are the ones we want to take forward. And the other side is people, right? The people we are working with at Accenture are just fantastic. They really put energy, enthusiasm, and brains into, and they were coming to us with ideas of what, how we could better run and grow our company throughout the process as they learn more. And so, you just, at the end of the day, it's all about people, and we found people we wanted to work with and are excited to work with throughout. And, it's not to say that there aren't many other wonderful people that we met through the process, at lots of other consultancies, but, we found the right home for us. And actually the lovely thing is I've had emails from pretty much every single company that we talked through that process in the last 36 hours, saying lovely things and congratulating us. And, so it's been really lovely.
No, fantastic, Rob. So something you just touched on a bit earlier, Rob, around actually how business has been going so well for yourselves. And it's something I'd be really interested to touch on, because obviously through our work, we've got to know a bit more about your approach with clients, but also internally. And something we've talked about before is how tech selling is very different from consulting selling. And obviously, to grow a successful consulting business, you have to sell, and it's something you and your team have obviously done very well. But I'd love to get your take on actually how those differ and why you follow that tech-focused approach, because I think that's going to unlock something for a lot of our listeners where, I hear people all the time say, we're struggling to sell, we're struggling to grow. Actually, how do you follow a different approach that really works for yourselves and has, given you the bumper month that you've just had?
So a blessing, I think, on our business, it may have been a curse, I'm not sure, I don't have the alternative reality, was that, when I started this, I was 26, I had been 2 years in PwC and learned a lot about how to be a junior analyst, but absolutely nothing about how to sell consulting. And I partnered up with two people to start the business. So a chap called Brent Hoberman, who founded lastminute.com and made.com. So, very successful, well-known British tech entrepreneur, and extremely well-connected. And then Henry Lane Fox, who'd been the head of product and first employee of lastminute.com. And again, a really, really successful, thoughtful tech investor. And it meant that I learned selling from them rather than from people who've been doing it in consulting all the time. And almost my journey to selling the sorts of projects we do now, the sort of deep consultative, thoughtful sell, sort of with clients, working out together what the problem is, let alone what the approach to solving it is. That kind of came organically from us sort of thinking about how to do it well off the back of what Henry and Brent are brilliant at, which is the sort of the really challenging, provocative conversations around where the world is going and being able to say truthfully what they think. I think consultants who've grown up in consultancy can, and not all, clearly there's many brilliant ones who do, but like it's always hard. Whereas for these two tech entrepreneurs who don't have anything to lose because they're not consultants, they're tough at times for me when I was the consultant. They're like, wow, that's quite a bold statement to make to a client. But really that's the sort of, that being truthful and being unafraid to lose a client because you're saying something that they might not like, and they might say, hey, look, you're not for us. I think that was just the lesson for me of, don't think too much about what they want to hear and think a lot about what you really think and really believe. And don't be afraid to say stuff that's slightly risky, and long-term and might not be true. Have you thought about this completely crazy possible future reality that they probably haven't and probably don't believe in, but it's a fun intellectual exercise to then talk through it together. So I think that's sort of what they injected early on. And then slowly I've had to learn the other bit, the technical bit of really, how you go through a good consultative sales process where you're sort of, understanding deeply the client and building a relationship.
I'm intrigued how you, having now learnt both, balance that, because to your point, there's something quite different and striking about that really provocative, frankly, do you know that you could be the next blockbusters if you don't do this? I guess tempered with, to your point, some of the consultative sale and actually that structuring with clients. How do you now balance that to give you something that kind of works for both? Because I guess the risk if you go too bold is you're not anyone's cup of tea. But if you go to the other way, you're just like everyone else. How do you strike that balance?
Well, the first thing actually I pick up on your question is I'd never say to someone that they're going to be the next blockbuster. I think you can never sell through negativity. It's always through optimism about where the opportunity is. So for us, we're talking about the fact there's going to be lots of growth in your industry. And look, here are some of the areas or the companies that are going to grow and could be the next $1 billion company. And they might not be, right? They might, that's the venture capital model. They might not be at all. But really, do you want to participate in that growth? Like, do you know where your next $1 billion company is coming from and how are you going to get there? And so the sort of being provocative is not being kind of rude or challenging or trying to tell them that they're not brilliant companies, because by definition, all these, the large companies we work with, the ITVs and Facebooks and BPs of the world are phenomenally successful companies at what they do. And our question to them is, do you know what you're going to do next? Like, what is the next thing? And so that's where we're provocative around, how your industry might grow and whether you're going to participate in that growth or not. So it has to be a very positive thing. And, I guess as all consultant salespeople will know, it's all about building personal relationships and, and actually working together on things. And if you ever feel like you're working against them, what I really learned from Brent and Henry is about being truthful about what you really think and not being thinking overly hard about what the client thinks and what they want us to think.
And I really like your point. I guess it talks back to, like you say, the difference between entrepreneurial and replicable growth of actually you're fishing in a new pond, not simply trying to dig deeper into the same pond. And I guess then to your point, if it is that, that optimistic and that positive slant, which I really like, to that values fit point, is it just being honest? If a client thinks actually the world's going left and you think it's going right, just being open about that in that sales process and seeing if you come together, is that how you would sort of navigate that conversation? Because I guess when you are dealing in that, what the world could look like in the optimistic side, there's probably quite a few horses in the race. And how do you temper that more to just, I guess, not blindly, and I'm not saying you do, but someone might blindly follow the client because they're going to pay versus saying, actually, look, that's not going to do it. This is where the next opportunity is. I know it won't be that simplistic, but I'm just trying to get, for our listeners, sort of harness how you'd navigate that.
Probably the answer is you don't, right? You don't try and come to any conclusions, because when you're talking about the future, there aren't any. There are only really opinions, and then there's only really, you can only put rigor around how you come to those opinions. And so, as long as you can put together a plausible, logical rationale for why you believe what you believe, then theirs could be perfectly valid in exactly the opposite direction. So again, you're never trying to win an argument in this. You're trying to open minds to other possible futures that they might not have considered. And the answer is, well, we need to do some really deep, rigorous thinking at this point to say, well, actually, are you betting in the right areas and are you exposed to the right types of growth? And that ultimately is then what we sell as an organization. And so once you've got to that point where you're having a really interesting, deep intellectual conversation, then, we know that that's what our clients are looking for in order to then think about whether we might be the right people to take that forward as a proper piece of work. So yeah, really you're trying to enjoy a conversation, I suppose. That's the main thing. If people are enjoying speaking to you, enjoying working with you, and really the conversation there is a sort of microcosm of what working with you over a extended period of time is going to be like, then you're probably into a sort of a good conversation.
Definitely. So I want to pick up on when you mentioned around your co-founders, and I'm going to come on to that shortly, because I think there's a bit more context there that will be interesting for our listeners, and definitely some learnings about how you met Brent and Henry and the journey there. But before we move on to that side, sort of probably my last question around building a successful consulting business. And it was something, I know we caught up sort of ahead of this, and just something you said that just intrigued me, Rob, because if I'm honest, it felt quite counterintuitive. And so I'm always interested when people have sort of slightly counterintuitive perspectives, which is, you said, look, if you're trying to build a business to exit a business, you're going to build a shit business. And I'm really interested in that, because I think there's a lot of people going into business at the moment. There's a lot of hype in terms of, grow, launch, IPO, etc. Actually, could you explain and elaborate a bit more on what that statement means to you and how that informs your approach as you're building Founders Intelligence?
It's a really good question, because we've thought about a lot, how we build a really high quality business. And if you're thinking about what an acquirer might want and what your exit looks like, you're second guessing what makes a great business. And, we really focused on three things. We focused on the differentiation. So what is it that really makes our business great for our people and great for our clients? And then the quality. So how do we make sure that we deliver brilliant work every time? And that probably for the first 4 years was all we've thought about what is it that's really different. But we sort of probably forgot the scalability bit, the last bit of like, how do you do that at more scale than 8 people where you're essentially running a big project team and make it work in, different geographies? And, how do you think about scalability? And, if you focus on that and building a brilliant business, then people are going to be interested in whether they can help with that scalability bit. And if you focus on what do you think the next thing that someone might want is going to be, then I think you just don't build a very happy business. And that's, I think probably the thing I'm most proud of is that we have a very happy business that I really enjoy working in. And, that's what you want. That was what makes a good business. And that's really what, at the end of the day, potential acquirers are going to be interested in, is businesses that look happy and strong and healthy and growing fast. And, we haven't exited the business. We've entered something new. We're all going in it together to build Founders Intelligence to be many multiples bigger in our new home. So, exit is entirely the wrong way to think.
I think that gives us everything I was keen to cover on the sort of business side. And I'm really interested to move to something that I think something I haven't talked with too many people about, but I know it's a really powerful topic when I do, which is around mentorship, because I know it's been a huge part of your journey. And you mentioned a bit earlier, Rob, around how you started Founders Intelligence and that you started with Brent and Henry. And maybe to open this up, can you just share the story of actually how you met them and how that came about? Because I think it's a really interesting segue into that conversation around mentorship.
Yeah, of course. So I started my career in a startup, first of all. So I was purely by chance. I'm always interested in the startup world, but the actual opportunity to join one for a short period of time was quite fortunate. Right place in the right time. And I did 6 months doing their growth and marketing. And then I was always planning to start in consultancy, right? I wanted to get a sort of broad exposure, all the sort of normal things that every grad says about why they want to be in consultancy was true with me. And so I joined the PwC strategy team and was doing sort of about 50% commercial due diligence, 50% sort of growth strategy, corporate strategy. And really, I think you don't appreciate those early years until a lot later. It's quite hard to appreciate them in the early years. Certainly I didn't. But I was really thinking about, like, how do I get back into the tech world? And really, I decided to go on secondment. So I went to EE and was part of the 4G Spectrum auction. And my boss there, a chap called Kip Meek, who was really wonderful, he, at the end of my secondment, took me for a sort of coffee and said, well, what are you trying to do with your career? And he said, well, look, if you really want to get back into tech long term, then you should meet Brent, who is one of the best entrepreneurs you could meet. And so, go and meet him. And he made a very kind introduction to Brent. And, really, I guess my feeling at the time at PwC, as a wonderful company and people as it is, was that we didn't have enough interesting things to say about the future. So from the startup I worked in, from the obsession I had with reading venture capitalist blogs, all this stuff that I thought was going to be true wasn't being reflected in the type of work we were doing or winning from our clients. And when I basically started talking to Brent, and especially Henry, who had just joined as the CEO of Founders Forum, which is their amazing events business where they bring together all of the top entrepreneurs from around the world, they thought exactly the same, right? They sort of thought about, well, entrepreneurs are inventing what the future of any industry looks like right now, and there isn't anyone that's helping large organizations to think about what they're doing and why and what that means for the large organizations and how to set strategy and grow based on it. And so I remember I went into that meeting with Henry and I sort of forgotten about it. And I had to ring my wife saying, I'm really sorry, I forgot to tell you, I've got to meet this guy. And I'll try and finish it quickly so I can get home for dinner. And, sort of 2.5 hours later of just really enjoying each other's thoughts and sparring off each other, I sort of rang her straight afterwards, be like, I think I'm going to resign tomorrow. That was cool.
Wow. So sorry, just to place that. So obviously Kip had introduced you to Henry. So this was your first meeting, and at that point you were talking about potential idea. Did you go in knowing there'd be a conversation potentially about a business, or is that just something that came through, you went to meet each other and 2.5 hours later you were talking about setting up a business? Which one, just so I can place where we go next?
Definitely more the second. It was certainly, it was always a conversation about coming to work for Henry in some capacity. It was sort of, Henry had just taken over as CEO of Founders Forum and was beginning to build all the wonderful other businesses that now sit around it. I think he and we have launched 14 since that date, 2013. And so it was always about potentially coming to work for him, but I hadn't really understood the vision or what it was, so I was sort of going in with a, totally like, this is just an interesting conversation, as opposed to like, I really didn't think it was something I would ever join until, Henry was very eloquent and, he is a very inspirational individual about, the things that he was trying to build and thinking about and change that he wanted to make in the world. And so certainly it wasn't like I went in with a pitch. And in fact, I've forgotten about it, but you reminded me, one of my friends who worked in venture capital, I actually did write a pitch to take to him about a business that I thought of starting. And I thought that was the best approach, is to come in and pitch something hard. And my friend who worked in venture capital was like, just honestly, don't do that. Your idea is awful and it'll be really, really bad.
Do you remember what it was?
Yes, it was for a payments business for small, medium-sized enterprises. It was, and obviously that is a good idea. My version of it was a bad one. And also it was just half thought out. And so, rather than having an interesting intellectual conversation with Henry, I would have had a pitch which he would have pointed out all the flaws in and then sent me packing. And so, it was very, very good advice from my friend George Mills, who now runs British Patient Capital Venture Fund. So I should say thank you to him. I'd forgotten about that.
It's actually a really good point, Rob, because I'm going to put myself in 26-year-old Nick's shoes, which was a long, long time ago now, scarily. But I think actually would welcome maybe how would you tell people to approach those conversations? To your point, drop a pitch is obviously step one. Don't go in pitching. But I do wonder, in today's world of social media, and you do see these things where, it's lauded that so-and-so spoke to so-and-so and suddenly got $1 million investment, 10 million, whatever it was. And I think with our sort of right now type approach to that, it can seem quite tempting at 26 to go, oh, here is someone who, on some level has power, has money, and that is obvious from the conversations you'd had prior, and kind of almost overplay it. How do you recommend people, I guess, go into these conversations? What I say, goal's the wrong word, but if a 26-year-old Rob's listening and someone said, in fact, 26-year-olds just coming to meet you as Rob for that coffee just to chat, actually, how would you be telling them that this is the best way to do that? Go into those conversations. What's that mindset people should be approaching these conversations with, so that they're not, like you say, going in pitching hard, alienating people, but also potentially not going in too soft and just having a nice coffee and talking about the weather?
Well, so obviously I get a lot of people come and interview, and it's sort of the same thing, because ultimately an interview, while a more formal setting of the same thing, it is a meeting in which two of you are trying to get to know each other pretty quickly and work out if there's some, you want to spend potentially years working together. So it's a very intense version of the same thing. It's like, if you're meeting someone in some way powerful or successful that you want to meet, it is an informal interview. But the most important thing is that I look for in interview is really, how much do I enjoy thinking and working with this person? And, we have a very careful set of criteria around we think about how an interview, but it always, where people spike in different parts of our different values. And really what I'm looking for is like, do they learn and engage on an intellectual level, or are they trying to desperately get through the interview? And so, really for me anyway, it's about, how do I engage this person in something that's really intellectual, interesting, thoughtful about a topic either they're interested in or they might be interested in. And that's kind of how, if I look through the important relationships that I've made through my career that have gone on to serve me really well, that's how they happen. So I've mentioned to you before, Nick, there's a man called Jonathan Calashoni, who was one of the senior partners of Monitor, one of the very early employees, and built that all the way up and was part of the sale to Deloitte, and has been part of Deloitte ever since. And he's just retired. He's just been utterly fantastic for me as a mentor over the last 4 or so years. And it was a really random introduction from someone saying, hey, you guys should meet up. And we went for coffee somewhere just and he was obviously late out of his head in a million other places. He's doing a favor for a friend to meet this kid he doesn't know or really want to meet. And, we started the first 10, 15 minutes talking about all the small talk, he was like, oh, that person, something about holidays, have you taken a holiday? All this. And I just suddenly realized this conversation was going to be a total useless conversation. And so I just sort of stopped it and said, actually, Jonathan, I'd really like to share some problems that I'm going through right now with the business I'm running and get your take on them. And he immediately lit up. I was like, oh, it sounds really interesting. And I explained Founders Intelligence, what we're building, what we'd built so far, kind of 3 or 4 years in, and some of the problems we were having with scaling or things I was seeing. And he just lit up and really enjoyed then the next 40 minutes of the conversation, talking about some of the monitor stuff as they were scaling monitor and some of here where he thinks about the same problems that I had. And we just had a really exciting conversation again. And then he was like, look, I ran out of time, but why don't you come and meet me again in a few weeks or a month, and we'll talk a bit more about that particular problem where I've got lots of thoughts on it. And it sort of developed from there. So again, there's something about taking control of the conversation to put it onto a topic on which you have an interesting set of thoughts or questions or problems, and people like talking. So you don't have to all the talk. You're not trying to impress all the time. You're sort of listen. And I think the person who did this best ever was when I first met the CEO of ITV, Carolyn McCall, who's become a really important client of mine. And when I first met her, she sort of, basically the first thing she listened to me for about 5 minutes talk about what we did, in total silence. And then she didn't respond to it or ask any questions. She just said, hey, here's a problem that I'm working on at the moment. And I was really surprised. And I, what she was doing was just seeing how I'd respond to a completely, slightly irrelevant to what I do actually, question that was important for her at that time. She was really struggling with it. And so to put it to me to see how I would deal with the same question. And again, interesting conversation later. And, she said, great, look, I haven't got any work for you right now, but I'll get in touch with you when I do, because I think you might be interested in a few different areas. And, she messaged me 9 months later or something with a sort of, idea on how we might work together. So it's that intellectual engagement. It was really impressive seeing it the other way.
Yeah, I love that, Rob. And obviously, the relationship you built with Caroline, I know you had a really successful chat with her the other day for Founders Intelligence, which was brilliant. And I guess shows the strength of the relationship you built there. And I think there's some interesting subtleties in what you've said. And it reminds me always of the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I don't know if you have read, but me at 21, I certainly needed to do both of those. And actually that, key point there of actually talking about things others are interested in will make them interested in you. And I guess there's an interesting element of actually
I wouldn't say that exactly. I'd say talk about things that you're really interested in, because that's when you light up and you're at your best. And they'll find something that they're interested in, and then you'll meet in the middle. I think, and I think a lot of this about, how you connect with people is about when you're at your best. Like when I'm at my worst, no one wants to talk to me, right? I'm, grumpy and unpleasant. And when I'm at my best, hopefully I'm engaging and interesting and people want to spend more time with me. And so thinking about what it is that puts you at your best. And that can be as simple as like where you're meeting and what you're wearing and how you've prepared for the meeting or not prepared for the meeting. I'm actually at my best when I don't prepare too much for meetings. And, like down to the point of like, I'm very careful about where I sit in a meeting room. Like I will, every time I move into a meeting room, I will work out which place in the meeting room will make me feel most comfortable. So I, for instance, very rarely sit looking at the windows. I normally sit so that I'm not on one of the long sides of the table, because I don't like that feeling of two sides of the table, one side against another. I always want to be the sort of person in the middle. And these sorts of things that, happen kind of subtly. And then I realized I was doing them. And now I sort of do them a bit more actively on like, what's going to make me most comfortable so I can be at my best and be at my, most engaging in this. And I think, everyone at every level of consultancy can think about that. Is like, you're in what environments are you most comfortable? Do you really shine? And, how do you create those for yourself?
I want to come back to that. You've stopped me though at the windows. So I'm going to have to ask, why not windows? Why not looking at windows?
I don't even know, but my team, a couple of my team used to take the piss out of me because we would go into these beautiful client meeting rooms where they're like overlooking St. Paul's, and I'd always just naturally sit at the table, my back to the window, and they always laughed at me that was the first chair I took. And then I realized, it's because I want to be focused in the room, and I'm quite easily distracted by that visual, whatever's happening outside, or, and actually, the meeting's about the people. And so you're here to do a job. And that was sort of subconscious. And then it's now become conscious that, it's actually around what I'm here to do and what I'm here to get out of that meeting and, what is best going to get that job done. And it sounds very cold. It isn't that cold. I'm not that sort of analytical about it. It's much more natural, but it's such a core consultancy skill that at every level, every interaction, whether it's internal, external, it's a sales meeting, it's a coffee with someone who might join the company, there's always a sort of what is this interaction about and how do I get the best out of it? And and that best could be a number of different objectives, but are you optimizing it for that outcome? And am I behaving in the way that's going to deliver that outcome? All these sorts of things are important. Do I go with high energy, low energy? Do I sit and listen and not say very much? Or do I, actually interject a lot in this conversation? It's important to think about what it is you're trying to deliver.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think, talks more to empathy than automation, I guess, Rob, because a lot of it is that, understanding. And there's an interesting part of what you've said there actually around that authenticity of being yourself, what you were saying, pick the cafe, pick the clothes, and I'm paraphrasing, but you show up as you. And I'm interested as well, because there was a second part of what you talked about of almost of being humble. And again, I'm thinking back to 26-year-old Nick. So 26-year-old Rob might have been in a much better place. But I think sometimes, particularly as consultants, you can want to prove yourself. I know I did when my last startup was very much something to do with that. But actually with people like you were saying with Henry or with Jonathan, being humble enough to be able to say, actually, I don't know everything, and not feel like you have to show how good you are. That feels like quite an important point, however subtle, coming through what you're saying. But I'd be interested to get your take on that.
It's really important. Yeah. And it's really hard to do. And I still don't do it well half the time. But being reflective on it's really important, and catching yourself when you're why am I trying to prove to this person that I'm good and worth talking to, because you're always better when you are in that confidence mode, in your kind of flow mode, when you're confident and being yourself and your best self. And it's something that, again, another really important person on my journey, a lady called Orna Niciona, who became our chairman about 3 years ago. And she gave me this really good feedback of look, Rob, you're doing really well, and you're good in these conversations, but you can tell still that you're not like a peer with some of the people you're talking to, because you've got this energy of showing how clever and thoughtful, and and it's really subtle, and I can't explain it to you, but it's a very subtle sort of your keenness to interject, to show, to prove. And she's if you look at the sort of really accomplished people and the people who sort of get in a room and they work out, who's at their level of whatever, it's how people naturally operate. I think it's just it's a human nature thing, and always very calm almost, and they don't need to prove themselves to anybody, and looking at sort of how they do that and how they act. And I think it is one thing I've always actually done in my career, is sort of the things you can learn most are from looking at people who you think are doing things really well and seeing how they're doing things, and look at people who you don't understand how they're so successful. And everyone does that, right? You look at some people in your organization or another organization, you're how are you so senior? And then think well, actually, how are they? What they obviously don't fit my model. Otherwise, I would understand that naturally. And but actually, what do they do? What's made them really successful that I don't do or don't understand? And how can I learn the most from their completely different style that doesn't work for me? So a bit of that, actually looking at sort of some of the people who do come in and just look super confident in a room and don't need to impress anybody, and what is it that they do that's different?
Just because I think it's such a good point that you flagged and that feedback from Orna. Actually, how did you learn that? And maybe you'll tell me Orna said you never learned it, or maybe I'd be interested how you learned that. And I think particularly for our listeners, where obviously you were, let's say, the managing partner, founding partner. So to an extent, there would be an expectation that you would be a certain way. I'm thinking particularly for our listeners where they're climbing those grades, how did you find you balance that, or advise your team to balance that, so that they seem senior and confident without seeming aloof? And how did you, or how do you?
Arrogance, aloofness, switch people off immediately, and that's not it. It's not. You're not trying to be arrogant. You're just trying to. It comes back to exactly the thing I talked about earlier on. It's what makes you feel confident and secure. It's that security, I think, and a lot of people, if you're feeling insecure in your environment or in what you're talking about or something else, then every other human picks up on it because that's human nature. And so it's actually that's probably the best way to look at it. It's like, who looks secure in this environment in which we're in? And you put that very senior person who looks very secure in that environment into a completely different one, right? They go and you put them in some other environment which they're not comfortable in, and suddenly they'll look very different and give off a very different energy in the room. And it's more, and you don't learn it, right? It's not like a framework you can go and read. It's about being aware of it. That's it. Like, as soon as you're aware of it, like, when am I feeling secure and when am I feeling insecure, and how do those environments differ, and how do I maximize the number of secure environments and conversations I have and minimize the others? That's really what you're trying to do. And over time, those environments change as you feel comfortable and you push yourself in. That's it. I think, through working with Brent and Henry and many others, I sort of ended up in lots of ludicrous situations where I was extremely insecure, and work out that actually they don't go horribly wrong. And, people don't think I'm a horrible imposter who shouldn't be there. And over time, that the number of places of security increase. And, I think it's something that we should all think about. And like, it's sort of obviously easier as a kind of privileged white male to do that. And I think it's very important that we all think also about like all the people who bring very different experiences and backgrounds into an environment and what makes them feel secure. And are we having conversations around that? And I think being more aware of that, the importance of that feeling in performing well, is something that, I'm certainly trying to do on my behalf, but also, have through conversation with others on, how do I get the best out of each individual in the team or the client or, anyone we're interacting with, or the founder that we're talking to, all these things really matter.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, actually, not just for mentorship, which obviously is what brought us there, but I guess that holds true with career, relationships, sort of life in general. To your point, getting really mindful of what puts you in, I guess, that flow state and what doesn't, because I think at its heart of most problems is exactly that, isn't it? Of if you're not in an environment that lights you up and gets the best from you and you feel really passionate, excited, but you're never going to be ultimately happy. And whether that's mentoring, whether that's career, I guess, would you agree? Is that sort of how, you approach it and how you guide others too, or is that too overly simple?
No, it's spot on. And as ever, you say something and it's really interesting to hear how you then pick up on it and what that means to you. And, you use the word happy there. And like, I think that's really important, like working out what makes you happy and when you're happiest and, how to create that as an environment. Again, it's the same concept, but just put into your words of how Nick operates. Very
true, Rob. Something on the mentorship and stop me if this is sort of, I guess, not a productive question, but to that point around where mentorship, because I'm a massive believer in mentorship. I've had some amazing mentors. I think, again, the internet has made mentorship this kind of, everyone must have a mentor, and people sometimes rush to have mentors. And I'm interested to get your take. You mentioned like the example where you linked it to a job interview, and I think it's a good example. It's kind of like dating, isn't it? And actually, you're obviously very good at making relationships. You've met and made some great mentor relationships. And it sounds like to an extent, Rob, you've been quite mindful in those. Obviously, it's about being your best self and seeing if they accept you. But I imagine there's been times where you've been thinking, is this the right fit for me? And I'd love to get your take for anyone listening, because to the point I said at the start around, you're told get a mentor to succeed. It can feel like you just got to latch on to someone. And I'm really interested, how do you get that feeling of whether that relationship is one that you want to pursue, or when someone says to you, I'm trying to find a mentor, how do you counsel them to actually find someone where there is that fit and not simply latch on to someone because of their title or because what they've done before?
Yeah, so for me, I've never looked for a mentor. I've never gone out and thought, I need a mentor. How do I find one? These relationships have all evolved organically and they've all been mutual. So Jonathan was really excited. He really enjoyed the conversation. He had it's given him, I hope, a lot of pleasure from working on some of the intellectual problems that I have had in building the company. And he's a great consultant, a brilliant consultant. And that's what brilliant consultants do, right? They enjoy other people's problems and they enjoy the work, the intellectual work of solving them, creating them into sort of structured puzzles that you can solve, and then solving them together and then less so than the actual implementation, which, as a mentor, you don't have to do. And so that's what I was looking for well, I wasn't looking for a mentor. I had an interesting conversation with him. It was clear that it was mutually interesting. And so we had more of them. And suddenly it was like, oh, you're sort of like a mentor. Would you? So we never formalized it, but, I've since called him my mentor and continue to. And I think that's true with many others. But I think that's what you're looking for, where because if it's not a mutual thing, then it becomes a very transactional, they're doing you a favor and they're like, okay, fine, and they don't engage in the same way. And that, might be great, right? And so I think thinking about what sort of mentor you might want or what sort of conversation you want, I suppose. And, your mentor might be someone more junior than you or might be someone in a different industry. I think the sort of title is completely irrelevant. And I guess, maybe easy to say, given I actually have some with very big titles. So, but I don't think it's because of their titles. And I think there's also, there's obviously a difference between a mentor and a coach, right? A mentor is someone who's sort of been there and done it a bit and can tell you a bit about how they did it and then solve the problem with you, as opposed to a coach who's doing it from a purely intellectual point of view. And I've not gone down the coaching route personally.
So I completely agree with your, I guess, overview there, Rob. And I think it comes back to, the theme that you've highlighted through this sort of section of have interesting conversations with interesting people. And if you find it mutually interesting, you'll keep talking. And I think in that way, like I say, it's a relationship like any other. And actually the mentor title, while it's a box to put a relationship in, is sometimes a misnomer, because to your point, and actually no one has a sign over their head saying mentor. Or my personal view is if I see someone where they do say, that's probably a red flag. It's much more like you say, it's a conversation. It's someone that you get to know. And actually, like you, there will be people who are more senior, people, peer mentors, peers that you bounce ideas off, and likewise people who are more junior to you who will tell you why and how you're doing it wrong, and probably blind spots you've got as well. And I'm interested the other way, and the answer to this might be very short of just everything you've said, but I suspect given where you are now, obviously very successful, running a consulting firm, I'm sure you get a lot of people wanting you to be their mentor. And I'd just be really interested kind of how you find that, and almost if you've spoken to any of your senior mentors, what advice you give to those who are in your shoes, who are inundated with emails or just frankly have too many people wanting their time than they can give to.
I think there's sort of two separate things you can do as a leader. You can firstly, we're all running teams, and our first priority has to be the teams, the people who've, devoted this portion of their career to working in your company. And that's, a big decision they've made. And it's definitely for me, it's my first kind of priority, and anything that the energy that I have needs to go there first. And then the other things you can do for people is mentoring them in a sense of, again, it's actually not a word I use with anybody. I don't think I'm anybody's mentor. They might use it for me, I'm not sure. But, it's like, can you help them solve problems they're having? And so where I spend more time, meet people more regularly, it's where, actually I think I've got an experience that's actually going to be useful to them. Not just because I like them as an individual or, they want a mentor and I'm someone who can mentor them. It's much more about, the way that they've expressed the problem that they're going through or the thing they're trying to achieve is something that I feel like I've got a point of view on that is interesting. And then is also interesting for me to explore, because it helps, for me to talk about stuff, because it helps crystallize in your mind the sort of thoughts that maybe were a bit looser before, and then you turn to someone and then you're like, that's wrong, actually, I'm going to say that again in a better way, and it does help hugely. And so, yeah, I suppose all of them feel like mutual relationships. There's not a single person I feel like I'm doing it as a favor to someone. It's they're doing me equally the favor about being open about their issues. And then the third is as an advocate, right? And I think it's not a word we use enough of who deserves us as advocates, and how do we advocate effectively for people who do deserve that kind of backing in their career. And I think that's another relationship that I think not enough senior people think actively about, what they want to, who are the people in the organization who need advocacy and deserve advocacy, and how do you do that for them effectively?
I've not come across, or I've not had someone explain that last point. So I'd be interested, how does that come to life for you? What is that advocacy? Is that sort of from a D&I perspective? Is it something else? How can people do that? And what is that area they should be thinking about?
So I've benefited massively. Like take Kip, who made the introduction to Brent originally. He was an advocate for me. He decided that he thought I was good and he would go out and proactively make opportunities for me. And I think I've tried to do that for the people in my team who've asked for it, right? Who say, actually, I want to be in venture capital, or I want to do this, or, this is my career, or this is how I want to succeed in the company. And how do you create those opportunities for people? And I think probably the way I've done that over the years is very unthoughtful, in that it's like, whoever tells me they want to do something, I always try and make it happen. And it's not and that requires the sort of kind of proactive confidence or, the ability to ask that when someone says, someone is willing to have the sort of take the risk of telling me something. And it's not a very inclusive way to do it. And so it's actually a conversation I've been having recently with people about actually, well, how do you be much more proactive about saying, well, maybe there are some people who aren't advocating for themselves, and you can help by being that advocate for them proactively and making a more thoughtful intervention in terms of how you help someone with their career. And, it's sort of early stage thinking that came out of a series of conversations. I'm part of something called the Forward Institute, which is a community of responsible leaders, or leaders who aim to lead responsibly and make positive change in the world. And it's a conversation I had at one of their sort of get-togethers 6 weeks ago or so. So it's sort of new thinking, a new kind of like work on how I might do that really well. But I think it's a important thing to be more thoughtful of about, where is it that you can spend your time and energy, and who do you spend your time and energy for?
I love it. And if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind doing some of that early thinking here, because I'm interested or fascinated really, particularly for my listeners, but equally for myself. I have a smaller team than yourself, and I can kind of just about man mark everyone. But when you get to your size, sort of touching 50, or even, we've got listeners running firms of 200, 300, 1,000, 2,000 people, actually how you strike that balance, because as you highlighted, very often, we're all busy human beings, and the person who puts themselves in front of you and says, can you help me here? And if they're, all the other criteria are met, you're inclined to help them. Actually, how in those conversations we've been talking with peers and for yourself, how do you proactively do that? Because innately, the people who are not coming to you are likely to be, and I'm making huge assumptions here, but people who may be more introverted or more nervous about you as the leader. And so, you can side up to someone's desk and go, what do you want to do? And how can I help you? And they'll go, I'm good, Rob. I'm good. Just, really happy. Bye.
Back off. Yeah.
Exactly. In those conversations, where are your early thoughts on actually how you foster that? Because I think it's one thing, it's a really admirable thing wanting to do it. It's then quite a hard thing to foster that. How have your early thoughts on that gone?
So it's thinking I want to do. So I'd love to do it with you and with other people who are interested in that topic. But, one of the sort of progenitor conversations for this is idea or realization was actually a friend who no one has ever told her how good she is. And she was saying, I was explaining to her my career history, and she was saying, she's now a very senior individual in her organization, but, she doesn't feel that anyone's ever sort of really told her that, and that she's destined for the top, and it was just very interesting comparing our experiences. And so maybe the first thing is not telling someone, where do you want to get to and how do I help? I'm going to be right. Like, that's a bit weird. It's a bit creepy. I think instead just telling people how good you think they are is probably a really good starting point of the conversation of, actually people need to hear that in order to build the confidence to at some point then ask you for the help when it's due. So that's probably a starting point, and there's probably about a million other things. There's probably some people who've done some best practice on this and really thought deeply about it who are listening, and I'd love to hear from them if you have.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Rob, and I think there's many strands that this could probably go down, because part of it's organizational, part of it also is geographical, because a lot of the mentors you talked about and that ecosystem is quite easy in London, or not easy, but is available in London. You nip down the road to wherever it was for a coffee and then nip back. Obviously, it sounds like your wife forgave you for being 2.5 hours late for dinner. But actually how you, to your point, give that reinforcement and those, I guess, social opportunities outside of somewhere like London, because just there's fewer people like that. And it's fascinating. And yeah, I think that's probably all we can say on it, unless there's anything else that's come, anything, I guess, any other interesting areas that for your discussion with the sort of that group originally, anything else that people suggested, because I really like what you say about just giving positive reinforcement. I guess, has that perspective changed your thoughts at all when you see someone who's doing really well and you're thinking, I want to help them? does that make you take a double take and almost think, I need to help one proactive person or one person who isn't getting enough support for every proactive person? Is it kind of like that?
I don't know. I mean, no, it's probably too early on that sort of to have I'm never going to have a policy on, but it's more just, again, it's a bit like earlier on, we were talking about the most important thing on building sort of confidence and security in yourself is being aware of when you are and when you're not. I think, it's very important to be aware of what it is that, how you're using your power, influence, mentorship, connections, introductions, and just being reflective on it and looking, actually, am I using them for everybody? Am I using them in a way that reinforces some sort of bias or unfairness in society, or am I not? Am I doing the best I can to not do that? And so, again, awareness is probably the first the first key part, and then we'll see what builds from there. But I think the other thing is, I think the sort of the world works in how people connect with each other and recommendations and introductions, and it just is a part of the world that will never change, and it is one that reinforces social norms as they are today. And so, thinking proactively around, actually, how can you begin to introduce those sort of concepts, as you said, like, if I'm going to give an internship to somebody because someone's asked for a favor, or a work experience, probably rather than internship, because we wouldn't do that. But I don't know, do make sure that you have at least, what is it? Like, these sorts of things probably aren't talked about enough. And, how do you make sure that you're at least thinking about them?
No, completely agree. I think, and maybe one for another podcast, Rob, but I think there is a business or a charity in access to work experiences, because to your point, I think a lot of this starts very young, and we talk a lot about some types of diversity, but social can be a massive one. And actually, if your mum or dad didn't work in the consulting firm or the bank and get you the intern, the work experience that led to that, that's that sort of that cascade, as I say, some sort of charity that opens up doors to places like yours, ours, and others where you'd have no access otherwise, I think probably already exists. But if it doesn't, I think there's a very good charity in there. The last question, it just struck me, so it's a bit out of place, but I'm going to ask it because you kind of, all of this conversation started with the fact you said Kip was someone who advocated for you. And this might be self-reflection. This might be something you've asked him over a beer years later. But almost to close that off, and for anyone listening who's thinking, I want to be advocated for, what do I do? Have you thought, or as Kip said, why he gave you, why did he introduce you? What was it about you and the way you were at EE that made him think, yeah, this guy's got something, I'll put him in touch with my friend?
I guess all you can ever do is try and perform your best and be at your best in any situation. And I suppose Kip saw that and, saw someone who was really trying hard to, it was a difficult and uncertain project and 6 months that I spent working for him. And, I really tried my hardest to make it the most successful I could. And that always wins the support of people. And then, it led to him saying, well, look, let's have a coffee at the end of it. And, we worked together closely. We were sort of locked in a room for 3 months doing a weird auction process. So, we got to know each other very well. But yeah, really just turning up and doing the best job you possibly can, no matter what the situation, tends to win people over, and they'll want to repay the favor.
Fantastic. And yes, I think, and exactly right. Work hard. I mean, getting locked in a room for 3 months might be a factor, but not always. You've got to do it in the right context, or that could be misinterpreted. Rob, so I want to take us back to something, and it's only because I had it in my notes, and this is probably quite shameful to admit, but I'd written it down and I had no other context for it. And you mentioned it earlier. And so I had it as kind of I might ask you if it comes up, and it has. So I want to ask you about the difference between solving puzzles and solving mysteries, because I had in my notes that plus important for consulting. I'm going to hand over to you. Can you explain what that means and why it's important for you or for anyone listening?
Yeah, so this is the distinction. First, I'll credit Jonathan Calacioni. I mentioned him earlier on, but he helped me understand. The way he describes it is there's really two parts of any proper consulting project, or project stage of any need. And that is, the client or whoever you are talking to has a mystery, right? Has something that they can't define that they want to do, like a difficult issue that they can't see clearly. And the job of normally the person selling the project is to turn that mystery, that really uncertain problem, into a puzzle, into something that can be solved. So something that can be broken up into logical pieces and then delivered as essentially a scope of work that then lots of people can go away. And there's obviously lots of mysteries within each of those pieces of the puzzle, but ultimately that's the sort of process. Is you have a really interesting conversation with a client about something they're trying to achieve and don't know how to achieve it. And then you turn that into here's how you could think about that mystery that makes it something that's achievable. And then at that point, they've got two options. Okay, you've really helped me here. I can actually go and do that myself. And probably, 80% of the time that's true. And so off they go, and they've had a really great conversation with you, and they're going to bring every problem to you. And then 20% of the time, actually, that's something that I can't do myself, and maybe your team could help me. And I think realizing that difference of the two stages of consulting has been really important actually for my enjoyment, and understanding why I enjoy my job is that early in consulting, you're really trained hard on your particular methodology for solving puzzles, right? For solving quite defined problems where, there's a scope and there's a project plan and there's a manager, and you're going through and you're getting really good and really sharpening those skills. And the sort of transition that you go on as you go into senior leadership of consultancy, and you start selling and you start actually getting into the clients bringing you difficult and essentially to them unsolvable, hopefully, questions, challenges they face, and sometimes they're emotional and people problems and all these, it's sort of everything, and to be a really good advisor to someone, they'll bring you all sorts of different problems and you help them turn them into solvable things that maybe yours to solve or maybe somebody else's. And that's the bit I really enjoy. And that's the bit I realize that the intellectual challenge of that every conversation to sort of pick up on what they're trying to do, to turn that around, sort of abstract it in a way that makes it into something that's understandable and sometimes to them for the first time, and then turn that into then actually what are the steps you then go off to do it. And I just think it's a really important concept that's probably not talked about enough in the two things you have to learn. And it's sort of the second bit is the bit that intellectually makes our career a really fun one. And especially, as you got really good at solving the puzzles, like making sure that you're getting exposed to enough mysteries, and that's really the problem you're working on. And I think the way to be really good at it is probably not to obsess too much over honing the puzzle skills after a certain time, and instead become a more rounded, get involved in other things, right? And bring points of view from totally different perspectives than people expect, and you become much better at that second bit by a diversity of experiences and interests, and genuinely being an interesting human who can, is not bringing the latest consulting framework, but bringing something from some poem they read. I don't know.
I think it's a great point, and both the last one around that diversity of thought and just thinking differently, and actually that puzzles and mysteries piece. I'd be intrigued, and it's a slight tangent, but maybe not too far of a sidestep. Is you talked about there how part of your journey was having to go from a puzzle solver, or a junior consultant is a puzzle solver. So I'm going to assume you left PwC as a puzzle solver. And in building your business, you had to learn to solve these mysteries and found you really enjoyed it. I'd be fascinated on that journey of those sort of last 8 or so years. Have there been any other of those really big inflection points where you've realized, or someone has sort of told you, you need to change that approach? Because I think that's something, when I look at certain people in consulting, they can get locked at a level because the old adage, what got you here won't get you there. Has there been anything else like that for you? And if so, what was it?
Oh gosh, there've probably been lots. So one I remember very well, in fact, the most important inflection point in our company was when we wrote down our company values. And actually, I talked earlier on about people who work for you being potentially great mentors. A brilliant individual called Ria Babari, who now runs Framework, which is a wonderful tech startup that's sort of bringing MBA to anybody. So Google it. But anyway, she worked for us, and she was always saying that we should think about what our values are as a company. And I think I'd sort of been like, maybe one that we're really busy. You know how busy we are, and we eventually did it. And I think values get a really bad press because they're mostly badly done and not used and not unique. And we went on a really rigorous process to think about, well, actually, what are the things that make our company unique? What are the behaviors that make our company unique? What are the things that our clients really value in the company, and how do we articulate those in 5 ways of behaving? And we call them the values, but perhaps maybe isn't the right term. But it was so important for us because to that point, for the first probably 3-4 years of the company, we couldn't articulate very clearly on what it is that makes someone successful at Founders Intelligence. And doing that said, well, actually, it's these behaviors, and they're on the website, and anyone can go and look at them. And that's what we look for in interview. It's what we talk about in project feedback with each other. Were you driven by impact? Were you rigorous in uncertainty? Were you authentically curious? Were you entrepreneurial? And were you in it together with the rest of the team as our 5 values? And each of those is sort of well defined and thought through, and we talk about them at every away day. And it really unlocked the business for us, the growth of the business, because we could for the first time articulate what really is the essence of our company that's different from anybody else's. And yeah, I just think for everybody, that's an important thing. And someone actually asked me last week what my personal values were. If my company values are so important, what are your personal values? I thought that's such an interesting, no one's ever asked me to articulate those before. So anyway, that's a project that I'm going to go on over the next few weeks to see if I can write those down. It's an interesting challenge to see, can you actually articulate something that feels authentic and inspiring to yourself, that can keep you honest?
You'll have to let me know how that goes, because I feel we may share similar challenges with these sort of processes. And we had the same journey. Yeah, I was always too busy to talk about them. And like you say, one of our team members, Dan, actually really focused on this should be something we do. And actually it was an amazing process. And like you say, has really helped as an organization us come together on what is different, what makes us distinct, and actually how do you build that into everything you do? Because until you illuminate that, you don't know. And it's all right when there's probably you plus one, but when there's, you plus more than that, just what Rob kind of thinks or Nick or someone else stops holding true.
Yeah, and crucially, they just have to be things that other companies wouldn't write down. They have to be unique to your company. Otherwise everyone's like, everyone values honesty or something, or, these useless words that sort of, that like anyone could recognize in any company.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, and it's something I remember always, one of my first ever is guest number 2, Don Morehouse, always talked about that, of going into offices and seeing values above the copy, the photocopier, where, like you say, no one really paid attention to them. They were just stuck on a nice poster. And actually, as you've highlighted there, living them and really embedding them in your culture is what enables them to live. Otherwise, they do just become honesty, integrity, and whatever the other 3 are that everyone has.
Just for us, it just means we can recognize people who are going to succeed in our company, and we're going to be the right company for them, where we see these traits and behaviors in people. And
to your point around personal values, I mean, turning that same question probably to you as an individual, as a leader, is there anything you've had to, or has there been an inflection point that you found actually you had to focus on, or that when you did focus on dramatically shifted the growth of the company or your enjoyment or the teams? Are there any that stand out? Is there something?
There's probably not a moment. There's a general slow realization of the importance of losing the sort of the hero complex, the kind of centrality to any narrative, that as a sort of someone who was here at the beginning of the company, for a long time, every problem was my problem to solve. And every time there was any feedback or something to do, I'd always have to be involved. And it's just the art of delegation, right? But it's not really that. Maybe that's too flippant. Like, it's the art of empowerment, of not having to be involved in things, of, actually the story is much bigger than any individual, and having the confidence to step back from it, I think, is like a really important, slow process that I'm still going on, and that everyone goes on, right? It's a sort of, and I think there's a brilliant book called A Fortunate Man by John Berger, who's an art critic, and he did a deep study, and it's a sort of photo and written study of country doctor in the Black country in the 70s. And it's just, that book for me really helped. Like, it was so brilliant to read this sort of study of an individual and how they changed through their career, although it was only looking at 3 months snapshot of their life. But, I found that idea of sort of moving from, like, as a young doctor, he wanted to only really work on, like, where he could be the hero, come in and save, traumatic injury and, like, with action, to actually enjoying a much slower process of watching patients over a long period of time, and things that, building deep relationships and thinking about, like, actually is this person healthy without me intervening? We're much more satisfied in that later on in his career. And I found that a really helpful thought on, my own behaviors and the own way we're building our company. And that's been so important. Just the brilliance of everybody in the company just astounds me regularly. So it's been important.
I love that, Rob. And I always like when it's a left field reference in terms of books. And it's funny how some of those things can have such big impact on you. And and you mentioned it's a journey and you're still going on it. So there may not be a short answer to this, but at some point you had to make a conscious decision to start to let go. And I do think, particularly in our industry, I see a lot of people who there becomes a tipping point where to continue growing, you've got to do that or you limit your growth because you have to be involved in everything. How did you get yourself in the early days comfortable with that? Because if you've been the everything for so long, or however long that is, it's scary doing it, letting go and giving people the reins. How did you get yourself comfortable? Or was it just that a fortunate man made you sort of mindset shift and you thought, right, let's try it?
No. I think that book helped me realize what had been going on in the same way that the sort of puzzle to mystery way of thinking from Jonathan made me realize what was happening. Sort of these concepts help you justify or explain what's been going on already. And the process, I genuinely can't point to a moment or a thing or something that's happened. It's the advice I got, like 2 days into starting the company probably is like, don't try and do everything. And they're like, yeah, obviously I've got to delegate and hire people who are better than you and empower them. And it's like, yes, of course I'm doing that. And you're not, and it's the subtle behaviors. It's the sort of, it's the thinking you're being helpful and actually you're being the opposite. It's the sort of, and so I think you can only learn by getting it wrong a whole bunch of times and for a long time. And, and having the people who give you the good feedback and the honest feedback to slowly learn how not to do it. And then seeing the results when you don't, right? When, the sort of the unbelievable growth and change in our company over the last 3-4 years, what we've created, entirely because I've let go a bit more, empowered more, and other people have way surpassed anything I'd ever come up with in any of these areas, including yourselves in marketing, right? And,
I think it's really refreshing, Rob, and I think not necessarily from any of the conversations I've had, but again, I think there is a leaning towards the 5 things to do X, which is, like you said, delegate. If it was as easy as delegate more and hire great people, everyone would do. I think I'll have to find his name, but there's a great podcast quote I remember, and I'll find it for you because I think you'd love the interview. But the guy said, if it was as simple as infomercials make it, we'd all have 6-packs and be millionaires. And I'm neither of those at the moment. Probably need a bit more work before I'm getting anywhere near a 6-pack at the moment. But I think it's a really refreshing point of, like you say, that journey you go on. I know failing in my first startup, which sounds much more glamorous than it was a real learning for me and actually taught me humility, which as a 25-year-old consultant, I didn't have anywhere near enough of. But actually going through that journey teaches you something. And, that's where you've just got to be cognizant of what is happening and making the most of it. And I think your point around just none of this is as easy as it sounds on the tin is really powerful. I think, Rob, turning to our last questions for today, and these are ones that I ask all my guests, and so interested in your take. You've started actually on one of them, but I'll ask it anyway and let you take it where you want, which is, first one's about books. And I'm just interested, what is the book or the books that you find yourself referring back to or giving away most, and why is it?
So this is a really easy one because there's one book that I have traveled with everywhere I've gone for 5 years, and I've given probably 20, 30 copies away, which is Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things. And it's a poetry book. He's an American farmer and poet, and it's just a collection of his poems. And it is, whenever I'm stressed, and stress all comes from the inability to see the bigger picture, I think. And many, many mental health problems do, or beyond stress, and I find that really helpful for sort of rebasing and thinking about, the wider world. And, you like reading it, you feel like you're in nature and you can understand sort of how your problems fit in with the wider world. And, I give it to anyone I know is stressed, essentially. And in consulting, often people are. And, it's just important to keep a perspective on everything. And I found this book personally very helpful, and maybe everyone else has thrown it in the bin and it doesn't speak to anyone else, but that's fine.
I love it. And I also think there's quite a nice element in there of you're giving away a book to help people with, not always, but help people with stress, while it's actually a book that is not about stress management or time management. Because I think, sometimes that's the go-to, isn't it? Oh, you're stressed, here's a time management book.
Well, maybe. I think consulting's a brilliant career if you enjoy it, right? And you have to make it enjoyable by making it intellectual and interesting and funny. And, if you make it stressful and you think about all the frameworks you don't know and all the stuff people write that you have to read, I don't know, it's dreadful. I wouldn't enjoy that. And so, I don't read many business books. They have to be recommended by a lot of people before I pick one up. And otherwise I'll just, flick through the summary. But it's being a really good consultant is about being a really interesting human and having clients who think you're an interesting human and so bring you interesting problems. And, if you look at it like that, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
No, I think it's a great way to look at it, and is very true. And I think too often we overcomplicate to our detriment as a group, if you call consultants, and like you say, think it has to be something it isn't. And I've got to ask, where did the book come from? Because of all the recommendations I've had, I think that wins for probably the most left field. And I just love to know, where did you pick that poetry book up from?
I bought it for my wife for Mother's Day in our second. When our child was 2. And I know that because she's never read it. And it still has the little note I wrote in the front saying something like, I hope you enjoy the peace of our wild things, or something, referring to our children. And I thought it was very funny. And I picked it completely at random off the shelf because it had a title, and I put 2 and 2 together. I was like, peace of wild things. That sounds exactly like our children. I'll buy this for her. And, I gave it to her, and then I picked it up and was like, ooh, that's interesting. Wasn't expecting that. And, it's been by my bedside ever since.
I love it. It's and I think just reinforces some of the things we've talked about around, the serendipity in some of these encounters. And I think then, Rob, last question, you sort of started touching on some of your advice just then, but I mean, the whole conversation has been about advice for consultants. So this could be your chance to recap. It could be your chance to sort of really reinforce any of those points, or anything new that maybe we've not talked about. And this question is quite simply, you've got 3 people in front of you. One is an analyst just starting out, one 4 to 5 years in. I always get this modeled, but say manager, they've got some options, but they're not that senior or not senior enough to go and do certain things. And then one who is approaching partner. So they're on the track, they're closing in, and they've got that decision point of, do I do it? Do I do something else? And the question is quite simply, what one piece of advice would you give to each of those?
Well, I think one piece of advice I give to all of them is, keep looking at what you really enjoy about the job. And there are lots of bits of consulting that people don't enjoy. And there are hard bits, obviously, like there are for all of us. And, it is a slightly crazy thing to try and do at times of, take the hardest problem someone has, tell them you can solve it for them, and then give yourself a fixed amount of time and money to solve it. And if it was easy, they'd do it themselves. And so you basically take all the most stressful stuff you possibly could and then, set yourself up to have to deliver it back to them in 3 months' time or something. So you're thinking at each stage. So when you're starting out, what do you see that's really fun, as well as the bits that are hard? Do you really enjoy the process of abstracting a problem and taking it from something real to something abstract and then back down into some real solution that someone can implement? And then sort of 5 years' time, when you're thinking about, is this the sort of long-term career for you? I think it's that point around, do you enjoy solving other people's problems? And not in a consulting way. I mean, in a conversational way. Actually, if you enjoy having a conversation in the pub with someone and you're the one who's always sort of saying, well, actually, have you thought about it like this? And, these are the sort of things, that's what I realized. I love that. I love bringing energy and clarity to other people's problems. And, and I do sort of a lot of conversations, and I sit on a few boards now, and they really excite me because it's fun. And I think, you might not yet at that stage be doing that with some of the clients. Hopefully you are, but that's the sort of journey to then go into the senior management side of consulting, when you're actually the sort of real advisor to a client and they're bringing you stuff that, maybe is uncomfortable for them to share, or, big problems they have, and you sort of recognize at that point, is that somewhere I want to go, by understanding if that's something you enjoy in the rest of your life. And then the piece of advice I found most useful when I was sort of, maybe in that junior partner kind of phase of growth was really about like, just make yourself interesting. Go and be an interesting human, and good things will happen because people want to talk to you. And I think that, like, I don't know what it's like at large organizations, but I hear it's a sort of stressful process trying to make partner, and you're getting close, and and I'm sure it is. And I think the sort of, if you're going to be really good for a long time, you have to think about sort of how you stay rounded and how you develop interests outside of work, because they'll probably fuel the best bits of your work in time, and the reasons why clients find you more interesting than someone else who's highly technically trained in how to be the perfect consultant. It's like, I don't think, in fact, it's the number one piece of feedback we get from our clients is that we're really authentic, nice, interesting people. And it's sort of annoying because, like, that's hard to say in any marketing. You sound awful.
Yeah.
But
as
it
soon
is,
as you say that,
what comes back. We do these, after every project, we do an NPS thing and a 15-minute conversation. And it's what we always get. It's like, we love your people and we love talking to them. And, it makes me want to find ways to work with them more. And that's what you want to hear, as well as, like, that we're technically quite good at our jobs and can deliver high quality work. But yeah, that's the advice I found most useful.
I think some great pieces in there, Rob. And I think, that enjoyment theme and just that richness of life is more than simply learning a framework and repeating said framework. And actually, like you say, make yourself interesting. I think it's a really nice point, and probably a great place for us to finish, Rob. So thank you very much for this. I've really enjoyed catching up. Obviously, we've got to know each other over the last few months, but it's always nice to sit down completely outside of work and, just chat about some topics and some really interesting ones that I haven't spoken to many guests about. So thank you for that. And I guess the very last, not really a question, but as much of, if anyone listened to this and they want to find out more about yourself, Founders Intelligence, maybe they want to apply to join or speak to you about potential problems they've got, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
Yeah, great. So Rob at foundersintelligence.com, get in touch, and definitely come and join us. We are growing fast, and especially with the news this week, we're going to be growing even faster. So it's a wonderful place to work, and I'd love to hear from people.
Amazing, Rob. Well, thank you very much for that. I will put a link I'll put your email address. I'll also put links to the books and various things you mentioned in the podcast in the show notes. Anyone who's listening can go and find them there. But no, thank you very much for this, Rob. Really enjoyed it. And all that's left to say is all the best for the rest of your week.
Oh, thank you for having me, Nick. It's a real pleasure to talk to you as always.
Cheers, Rob. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.